Paula.
Hi.
And Mariam, who is virtual, but very much there.
Yeah, I feel like you were taking a little pause there.
I thought you wanted to say hi.
I'm here. Even though you can't see me.
Yeah, so I think we wanted to spend this episode, I think, having some thoughts around. I know we've already touched on our experiences in the different levels of stages we are with qualifying and kind of a bit around our contexts, but I think just some discussions around how we work systemically or as systemic thinkers in organizations that might not be so systemic or might not be so aligned with maybe what some of our values and kind of social justice movements are around. And I think it will be helpful to think about it because we sort of are exposed to very different professional agencies. So I think for me, having worked sort of in CAMS, I'm quite exposed to working with social care and schools and kind of really thinking about some of our experiences, kind of navigating, working with those organizations where there might be some kind of racial biases or racial stereotypes identified and how we sort of navigate that. So I think for me, a lot of my experiences have been more around, I feel, adultification and vilification of young Black girls and boys across several organizations that I've worked with. And I think it's about not kind of here to scrutinize or bash or generalize, but more sort of just to get an idea of how do we navigate this and what could be sort of done around this.
I feel like you had one specific example in mind because that's what sort of started this conversation for us, isn't it? Like, we had an experience at work that made you think about this. I think it was.
Yeah, I think it's not just one experience. I think I often find myself working. I think a big part of our job is advocating. I don't know how it feels like for you guys, but I feel like a big part of the job for me is trying to advocate for things when it feels like it's been responded to in a way that it's not necessarily appropriate. And I noticed that, for example, when working with different schools, I feel like there is a very big difference to a Black boy and how he is treated or how his behaviors are interpreted compared to a boy of a different race. And I wonder about that sometimes. It's like, what's that about? Why are we vilifying this child? Why are we understanding their behavior as destructive or chaotic? And why are we not? I feel like there's less empathy and understanding what the reasons behind that might be. In social care, I think sometimes I see a bit of adultification where it's sort of 13, 14-year-olds have there's been a lot of expectations set on these Black kids at an age that I probably wouldn't say is developmentally appropriate, you know.
And would you say that's from professionals or from family or both?
Both.
Okay. That's interesting.
So I wonder what that's about. And sometimes I wonder, if this 14-year-old Black girl, you know, there's so much expectations, and would this kind of level of expectations be expected of if it was a white girl? You know, so sometimes I find myself in those kind of thoughts, and I try to kind of express and challenge that, and I think sometimes that's not received well, or I'm just seen as that annoying CAMS clinician.
So even when you sort of bring that to light, people are not able to sort of take a step back and reflect and actually hear what you're trying to sort of address. Or do you think they get defensive? I'm just trying to paint a picture of, because I imagine if someone points something out to me, I'll have to actually pause and think, what is it about how I position myself? That means that this is what they're getting, this is what they're seeing. Do you know what I mean? But do you feel like it's more like a defense thing? Like you said, oh, here we go again. Or do you know what I mean? Like, as anyone ever received it in a positive light to think, actually, I've never really thought of this in this way. And
I think it really depends on the person that you're working with. But I have seen cases where it becomes kind of like defensive, and it's like, are you saying this? Are you claiming this? And it's like, not at all. I think I'm just trying to get us to think about how we can be a bit more constructive and equal, and make sure that we are not kind of playing into certain racial biases and stereotypes. But you do meet it with a bit of defense sometimes, because of course people don't want to be called racist, and people don't want to be called, have their competence questioned or whatever.
I guess I'm thinking of a specific example actually, and this was more like in the news. I'm sure some of you might have seen. Is it Child Keys? I always forget.
Oh yeah.
And this is a young girl from an Acme school basically, who I think they thought she was dealing drugs at school.
She had cannabis on her, I think.
I think that was
Well,
the
so that's
allegation,
the-
and
that
that's
was
what
the
that was
allegation.
allegation.
Yeah.
I don't actually know if it was actually true in the
It
end.
wasn't.
And unfortunately, they had to get this. I think it was school police that had come in, and they were searching her, but there was no appropriate adult, and I actually can't believe there's no school staff would think actually she shouldn't be searched by herself. I think it might have even been a male officer. I can't remember clearly, but I think it was.
I think it was female. I
Was
think
it
there were
female
officers? I
officers?
think there was 2 officers, or at least an officer and maybe a school staff. I don't want to,
But at least I know that her parents were obviously not present,
and they weren't informed.
Yeah, and I think it was, and I even feel bad even mentioning this, but I think it's important to say. I think it was the time of the month for her. I mean, we should have never known that. That's something that's now got out to the whole world, because this is now out there in the news. But it was also a really sensitive time for her, and she had to go through that with no privacy, with no appropriate familiar adult for her, and it's almost like, again, I've not heard of that before until that situation, and I'm sort of thinking, why was that the case? Why did no one say anything about it? And even that, and I think I'm almost saying that the allegation was unfounded. Where did that come from? Why was it that? Why did they think this about this young girl? That led to, the police. What's the steps before you get that far? Do you know what I mean? Like,
And
how did
was
things
that
escalate so
necessary?
quickly?
And I suppose thinking about, so there's so many different parts of that, because it's thinking about obviously the steps like professionals, people in positions of power can take to minimize, hopefully eradicate, but to minimize putting young, especially, I know we're talking about young black kids, so young black kids, putting them in those positions where you're putting assumptions and expectations on them that far, like you say, exceed
The developmental age, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's also the legacy that happens for that young person in terms of their mental health, like how that normalization within the community of what we expect from black children compared to their white or non-black counterparts. Like, what are those expectations, and how does that impact them developmentally? How does that impact them psychologically? Like, how does that impact the relationships that they have and they can't have, and who they turn to? I'm thinking about, so that particular young person, I think, will probably have struggled. I feel this is very well known. It's really struggled, and that's been something that's been highlighted in their case against the police. But actually, even for just young people who we aren't so aware of the mental health, the kind of overt mental health presentations, it will have some kind of impact on how they relate to the world. If the world expects things from them that are far above and beyond what their peers are expected. And I feel like I've said a lot but not said anything at the same time.
No,
but
you
it's
have.
like,
I think it's given a clear picture of why it's an issue. So I'll be thinking, what's the big deal about that situation? But I think it's important to note that not only is it inappropriate, but also it's not something that, from my knowledge, and I think from what we've talked about, it's commonly experienced by others. So the question is, why is it that this has now become this black young girl's experience, and why was it allowed to happen? I think it's something else that we're saying. But I think, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that, and also you, Mariam, I don't know if you wanted to say anything in that context before I move on to something else I was thinking.
I suppose in a way I was hearing kind of some of the things that Fazana said, and at the same time I was thinking a lot about also, like, especially our roles as professionals and practitioners within these settings, because I also work in a CAMHS context. So I was really kind of resonating with that, and I have an example that I would like to share at some point, just around like within the professional kind of nature and how some of these things get handled. Whether
You can share it now because I think it's relevant.
okay, no, I guess the example that I wanted to share was around an experience that I've had very recently, and it was basically, I guess, race came up for me because it always because it always does, gender always does, culture and all the rest, and maybe even my own style as a systemic person and how I might kind of present myself, also kind of my own appearances and how that might kind of some of the prejudices that might attract as well in terms of the families that I work with and the colleagues that I work with. So I work in a context where it's a very, I don't know what word someone used that I thought it was a really good word. I don't know, it's very, did you know that, like very, you know when, I don't, this is not fair.
The anticipation.
Yeah. What to say, like, I don't want to say like backward, but when it comes to like racism, discrimination, like, it's not something that you talk about openly. The systemic people are the people that always bring it, always talk about kind of any type of prejudice or ask questions along those lines. So even in terms of if a family is expressing dissatisfaction in terms of, actually, no, why is it that you can't make an appointment with us? Because it's not good enough that you have to have extra training, as in mandatory training. It's not good enough that you have to have study leave. It's not good enough that you're off sick. It's not good enough that you're unwell. It's not good enough. So that sense of entitlement from a family never gets cushioned by the people who are on the receiving end of, like, oh no, why can't we just see you? Because in terms of your profession, like, you know, there's a doctor in front of your name, and also you're kind of racialized, quite, you know, you're white, so yeah, you know, we could just see you. Why is it an issue? You need to question this Mariam, and why is she so like tentative, and she's making us do all these creative things to think about different ways of creating difference in the family and the type of difficult conversations that get had. And within the system, like the replicative kind of aspect of kind of even how these things get handled, for me, it's like, oh, it irks me. And I'm a talker, guys, and you know this about me, and voice entitlement is a big deal for me. Being silenced is a big deal for me. So I don't get silent. I will ask the questions. And if that's going to make someone feel uncomfortable, and that's fine. And I don't know whether people understand that, but I'm trying to not give so much detail, because if people within my work context hear this, they will know exactly what I'm speaking about. But also, I guess I'm curious about how, like in a, I don't know, in a managerial position, how people handle, you know, feedback, for example. How people handle feedback. What are some of the questions that they might ask themselves about? What is so different about this systemic clinician, this CAMS clinician from the family they're seeing? What is the same? And how might this be influencing the work? Because these are questions we will be asking ourselves in our own reflections. And times, actually, very often, at the beginning of the work we're doing, we are asking those questions. We are asking those questions. What is it like for you? Or, you know, I can't change my appearance in terms of me being racialized as Black or a person of a global majority. But let's talk about how this is going to affect how we work, how, you know, the work that we're having, or what's happening. And quickly, I'm not racist. You know, I don't know. It just feels so sensitive for me at the moment, because it feels very raw from all levels, to the point where in every conversation that I'm having, about families, the spaces I feel safest in having these conversations, which is the systemic kind of conversations, those circles, is I'm asking the questions that they're not getting asked, or if I do ask them, they get brushed to one side, or they don't get thought about, they don't get considered from, like, and it's really frustrating. And I know it's a CAMS thing, and I shouldn't be. Sorry. I know it's a CAMS thing, so we're not going to be bashing areas.
And I think it's just the reality of, and I think, and I'm hoping that if someone's listening to this that works in a CAMS service, it helps them think about why they're not doing it. And that doesn't just, and that's including us in the global majority. I don't think it's just global majority people that don't do it. I think even sometimes we get so used to that system, like you were saying, like in CAMS, or no one talks about it, or there's a long waiting list. You know, it becomes like a tick box exercise to actually work with families. But you're right. I probably name it more in the clinic than I will in an assessment clinic. Does that make sense? Like if I'm doing an initial assessment, I might not really name these nuances, that there's differences, because in my head I'm like, okay, I've got to do this assessment within 2 weeks, and I've got another one coming up. You know, I'm just like trying to get those people through the door that I might not stop and think as often. Does that make sense? Or if I take a supervision with my manager, that looks different compared to when it's in the clinic and we have peer supervision. Do you get what I mean? But I guess what is it? What needs to happen? How do we have these conversations more that it sifts into other professionals, even within our own system, let alone the schools or the social care? Does that make sense? Because if we're not having it in our own systems, imagine we are probably asking for too much. I imagine now thinking about other systems to think about that with the families that we work with. I don't know if that makes any sense in terms of now what Mariam said. Why is it always the systemic people, quote unquote, that name these things?
I suppose it makes me think about the trainings. I think people have. We were talking about this on the train on the way here, and this idea of actually people come from very, very different kind of approaches and ways of thinking and viewing the world. And I think systemic is quite unique in that it tries to hold all of that and tries to acknowledge all of that. But I was thinking about a little bit about what you were saying, Mariam, and connecting it to what you were saying, Lola, and thinking about how actually what are the things that help and hinder us from being able to not just us, but anybody feeling able to speak out when systems feel quite oppressive and feel that they aren't. And there are constraints, and there are going to be personal experiences that really will enable people to say more, or to shy away and be like, do you know what, maybe this isn't this area. I can chip away at this, but I can't chip away at that, because experience has told me that actually I'm just coming up against like a brick wall, and actually that isn't the best, most effective or efficient use of my time or energy, and actually there's other ways of kind of going around it to dismantle it from either the inside out or from the outside in. I'm not quite sure, but and it's thinking about all of those things that I think systemic thinkers, not necessarily even just systemic therapists, but people who have some kind of background or understanding of systemic theories, have an understanding of that. Whereas I think, and that's not to say that other people don't think about it, but I think their lens isn't so primed to think about, okay, even having conversations about the systems, I think, and the fact that, okay, so CAMS is the example. So CAMS, you know, sits within the wider mental health service, then that sits within the NHS service, and that sits within the public sector. So within that, there's all, and you know, CAMS also has, like, if we think about it as a Venn diagram, also has like different teams, but also has different overlapping services. You have your like your school outreach teams, and you'll have your and you'll have to be in communication with the schools and police and social services and any other kind of not-for-profit third sector organisations that are going to be working with those young people, and not to mention the families and the communities, and we're kind of holding all of that. And so it's really hard to really think, okay, where is going to provide the most effective change when we're thinking about some of these issues where young people that we work with, or that you work with, are going to be experiencing kind of the most pressure points in terms of their social identifiers. So whatever that might be, so it might be their sexuality or their religion or their race or any kind of combination of those. But yeah, I think it's really hard, and it's I always think of the systems are set up in certain ways to keep it at the status quo, and so actually how hard it is without being incredibly like
seen as disruptive.
And also not being like hopeless about it, because I think there's so much change that can happen, but it can feel a bit like when you try and make a change, actually the system just adopts it and goes, we meant that, and so actually all of a sudden it's like
nothing really changes.
Like all our wonderful, you know, diversity, inclusion stuff, which is in some ways the way that it's what's it called? Not actualized, but in the way that it's implemented can feel very tick boxy.
Yeah, which wasn't the original intention, but now it can feel like
and
that.
Now it feels like it's, you know, all this unconscious bias training, which is wonderful, but also it's like actually there's a point where it just becomes, did you attend that training? Okay, brilliant. Now you are. Now you are. Now you're woke.
More diverse.
And so it's how the systems adopt it, and it's constantly having to battle with that.
Yeah. And in Mariam, you've got.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
No, I just wanted to kind of connect. There's something you said about kind of what gets in the way, or kind of what are some of the restraints or things that hinder us basically like creating voice or kind of making a change. And in terms of kind of some of those things in this new team that I'm working in, it's not anyway, apparently this is an ongoing thing, right? So even the non-systemic people are trying to fight this fight, and when I'm like, oh, we can keep asking the questions, they're like, oh, Mary, you haven't got, you're new, you haven't got. The more you talk, the more work they're gonna send your way, because they're gonna want to silence you and stuff like that. So, and I guess that is happening, and it you know, and I could experience it like that, but maybe I'm choosing not to experience it like that, or maybe I'm choosing to, again, maybe kind of use what I know of how services are supposed to operate, of what I know in terms of what my own entitlement are as a clinician there, in terms of me saying, actually, I have to do this. This is what you'd like me to do in terms of me doing my job. But for me to be able to do it at the standard it's required to, because these are people's lives we're talking about. This is not going to work. This is how I'm going to be able to do this. And if that's a problem, let's review things. I'm happy to have 3 ways, 10 ways, whatever we want to have, and take it wherever.
Not the 10 ways.
Like, I don't know, like, no, because it's not going to work. And I think there is, and those power issues and those kind of, you're new in a role, actually there is a probationary period. And I'm like, I will read all the policies so we can go there. Like, if it's going to be that type of fight, let's go. You know, because I know this act and this act and this act. I will go and start reading. So for me, it's a fight I'm willing to have. But it's battering. It's kind of, you know what I mean?
And I guess, sorry, in your country, I'm also thinking about the fact that I know you couldn't sadly make the end of the last episode, but it was what we're talking about, because I guess even though you're in a different team now, because you were in that wider service before you were kind of in your training, do you think some of it is the fact people expect certain things from you because they think, oh, you've been in the service for X amount of years, even though, like I said, it's a new role, like literally it's a new role. Do you think part of it is that people have an expectation of you based on what they think they know of you? And I'm very careful with my words, what they think they know of you. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. They're like, no, these people don't know me, and that's fine.
And I know that they don't know, but I think it's what they think.
But that's the thing, is that this is an expectation for everyone to be doing, like maybe the level of workload that people are supposed to be doing, but also in the way how that gets done. It's like you don't ask questions if the systems, if there's issues of power, there's issues of race, there's issues of prejudice, there's issues of all types of discrimination, from ages to sexes to like all these whatever isms that you want to bring.
Yeah.
In the doing of that work, this service or this place or this team or whatever, it's just been all right to be run like that, because people easily get frustrated with trying to make a change, and they leave. They get frustrated and they leave, and some people are not. Maybe they've done enough to fight that they've done. So I think for me, whilst I'm more than capable to do the things that I'm being asked to do, it's they don't know me. So my voice is going to keep being utilised
as it should be,
and voicing and and asking questions, and I'll ask it to the top, to the left, to the right, to the whatever it needs to get asked to provoke what needs to be provoked. Because if people are not thinking about the things that are not necessarily that, these are important issues. These are important.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing, Mariam. I guess, I don't know, I feel like we've been a bit quiet because I don't know what you're thinking. Yeah,
you put me on the spot.
So
I know. I was thinking a lot about actually the other side of things. I think we were thinking a lot about organizations, and Mariam, you sort of shared some of your experiences of trying to kind of take a stance of actually, well, I'm going to be vocal and what you're going to do about it. But I was also thinking about, there's also the other side of the organization where they're sort of like, oh, we don't get black patients, oh, we don't get black boys engaging with CAMHS, and it's like, what narrative or what kind of experiences have we given them that they almost kind of, I know there's a lot of contextual reasons that could go into that, but I know that there is a strong narrative around professional services and actually letting black boys down
and misunderstanding them as well.
So it's like I find it a bit sort of, on one end we're asking these questions, but on the other end we're not actually looking at what's and I guess I'm talking more from my experiences in adult mental health, my experiences in prison services, working with sort of 18-year-old black boys and sort of trying to engage with them therapeutically. There was a lot of sort of, they're so used to having experiences with organizations where it's sort of behavior consequence, and all their behaviors are just interpreted as behaviors, as misbehaving, as being conducty, which I actually hate that word. So it's they then develop a narrative of these professional services where they don't feel safe enough to come to us for these types of things. So do you know what I mean? But then on the other, they're like, oh, but we never get them in our data. So why do you think?
Do you know what? In a complete reframe, there's a part of me that is like really sad and really upset, but there's a part of me that, again, thinking about liberation psychology and this idea of the community, I'm not saying healing itself, but in some ways being like, yeah, actually, as a young black boy, they aren't safe in services because services don't understand them and they can't meet their needs because they have framed them in such a closed way. And actually, there's something really protective and resourceful, and again, it feels like I'm now putting more kind of adultification on them and putting more I don't want to say wisdom, but bless them, 15-year-olds, your brain isn't fully wired yet, so it's like, but putting that sense of like, okay, they can make some internal rational decisions in the sense that life has kind of taught them where is safe and where isn't, and actually CAMHS isn't safe for them. God, that's such a sweeping generalization, but I mean that in the sense that professionals are not gosh, I'm setting a bit of a fire myself, burning some bridges, but they aren't trained enough.
They're not equipped.
They're not equipped, that's probably the better way of saying it. They're not equipped to manage working with the needs of young black boys specifically, because that's never been the focus of training, because they've always been, like you say, anytime young black boys present with any kind of problems, it's been it filtered through as a behavioural problem or an issue around discipline. So it's never about their mental or emotional needs. Their mental emotions are completely ignored.
I think I'm linking it back to sort of, I guess, the part that Mariam was talking about. If as Black or government majority professionals, we're having to be the ones to talk about these things. Imagine they're not thinking about their families. Do you know what I mean? If the people that they work so close that they see every single day, they're not thinking about some of their context. Imagine them now thinking about the context of the family. So a little pause. 30 minutes. So yeah, I was just saying that, just sort of linking it back to what Miriam was saying, like, before we can even get to the outside of, the families, there's still the internal work that Miriam's sort of talking about in terms of that's not happening and certain things that are not being talked about. Does that make sense? Because if we're not having that initial conversation of difference when you first walk into the room and trying to understand, I want to know your context. I've not lived your life, and I'm not going to pretend like I have. As let's say I wasn't of the majority, and even if I was, I'm female, or even if we're from the same, let's say, background in terms of country-wise, even in the same family, two people don't have the same experiences. So we can't just generalize and just think, oh yeah, if this person is doing this sort of behavior and they look this way, it must be this. If they're this and they're this way, it must be that. It's like we actually just need to hold each individual as a unique person, even within the family context as well. And I guess just kind of talking about young Black men, just thinking about, again, the example that we had mentioned before we started recording that was in the news recently. I know obviously he's probably now, I'm not sure if he's in his 30s, but there's the young Black man that's been in the news recently because of what happened last year, where he's got a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, and he had basically killed two students in Nottingham in the middle of the night, and they were coming out from a night out, and he had also killed another man, an older man, and taken his van and tried to even hurt more people. And sort of, I know that the families are really angry at sort of the order that he was given. So basically he was given a kind of lifetime hospital order because he was seen by 3 different psychiatrists. And I think even that, I don't want to go into it, but there's other cases where when they look different from him, other things is the one put professionals to say, oh yeah, they're mentally unwell, and it's put off as that. But in this case, I feel like they had to really prove that it wasn't just a Black man being violent. There's also other nuances. I'm not excusing the behaviour like at all. That's not what I'm saying here. But there had to obviously be two other people to kind of verify that he was mentally unwell at the time of this thing happening. But also the fact that it's been ongoing. Like, apparently his family have been complaining to the police, to services, that they don't think he's well. We believe that he's being followed. We don't feel like we're safe. And nothing was done until, sadly, things got that far. I remember I was reading something on LinkedIn, I think it was today or yesterday, and somebody was like, also the fact that he's been criminalized even before now, actually, if the right services were already involved with him, could things have happened differently? Could it, if he was getting the right help, if he felt, he was being listened to, how could things have turned out differently for this person? And even talking now, I'm even thinking about mental health services that I work in. Rarely see Black men work in these services. Hardly, in terms of like CAMHS clinicians. And then that now in clinical psychology, I'm seeing a bit more Black men go into that level of things. But genuinely, I don't have a Black CAMHS clinician that I know in service I work in currently. I know there's an educational one, and I don't know if there's a school, there's educational mental health workers now. I know there's like a couple there, but that's still kind of low level. In terms of that middle level and higher level, people that look like them are not in the services. So again, it's probably really hard to open up if you don't see someone that looks like you, that you might feel like would understand your plight. But yeah, if I'm gonna go into a whole other.
I get that, but I think it's more deep rooted than that. I think, Miriam, it feels to me anyway like it's really about how the systems, because and that's where I think individual clinicians, I think it's really hard to see the changes that we want to see based on our own kind of beliefs and values that we hold about, equality and human rights and all this kinds of ideas, because it feels like it's so embedded, not even in just
individuals, but
the way we work, but just how the system operates, kind of makes us work. Like there are certain things that have to be done. There's certain ways that things have to be. I say have to be done.
We kind of need to fit in boxes. It's hard to step out.
And it just feels like it's quite. It does feel like it needs a little bit of a shake up in some way, shape, or form.
I agree, Megan, because I was thinking, as you were speaking, Lola, I was thinking about often, and I think there are statistics that sort of support this, but why do they get access to support when it's at the most extreme? Their mental health is at the most it's deteriorated to a point where they are doing quite serious things like killing people. Like, why does it have to get there for them to be able to get that support? Because I'm hearing stuff about this person's family complaining and raising these concerns, and I've heard several other cases where it is the case where there has been concerns raised and it's not been taken seriously. It's not been taken seriously until, when something, unfortunately this person has gone unsupported, untreated, and they go and do something very serious and then automatically sort of, punished for it.
Yeah. And just to even add as well, and this is not going to get into, but and I know it's also deeper than just the person's race or social thing. I think it's also about the systems, like you're saying, because there was the other case again this week where a man, and I think he's Eastern European, he had called the police that morning and said, I don't think I'm well, I don't think I'm okay, I'm really worried. I don't know if you saw it, and he ended up killing his daughters. And I'm not sure who the woman was, but again, this is in the UK where he killed himself. I believe he killed his daughters first, and this other woman that was in the house. I'm not sure how she's related to them. But he had called the police an hour and a half before someone in the public called about a disturbance there, and they didn't come out. And I don't think this is the first time they had contacted the police before. So again, it's like, it's really hard with, like, I don't know. And again, this is a man now. Even it's so hard not to bring certain things in. I can imagine it takes a lot for a man to pick up the phone and actually call and say, I don't feel like I'm okay, I need help. Like, what sort of, again, they're going to investigate it as always, but then a lot of these things, like what comes out of it, what's actually going to change.
And this is where it starts to become quite political, in the sense of, okay, we all know, we all work in statutory services, at least to some extent, and we see, and we also just live in the UK at the moment, and and there is, like, the pressure on the public sector is so immense, and the fact that actually, like, we can't kind of get away from the fact that this is some of this, we know the NHS can waste money, but also it's so underfunded at the moment that actually it can never meet the need. It could never meet the need in its current iteration.
And we don't have. I agree with you, because I'm also thinking about resources. So when we think about our hard to engage children, do services have the resources to be chasing someone and getting them to engage after for like 6 months? It could be the case, certain organizations would be like 2 DNAs, discharge. Adult mental health, in my experience, has been very cutthroat about that. But again, I've only worked in sort of specialist settings. I think generic CAMHS is quite similar in that sense as well, because they're so overwhelmed with a waiting list that they are having to prioritize people who would engage. So I agree with you. I don't think the systems are set up to work in that way at all.
Like, what's the motivation for an organisation, or for a setting, for a CAM service, and we're talking CAM specifically, for them to try to engage those hard to reach, those, to do that kind of outreach work, when they're like, we could barely have the capacity to see half of our waiting list. Like, we barely have that capacity.
Like I said, early intervention, the list is over a year. Like, that's so crazy when you think about it.
And people are trying to not push. I think when you have such little resource, you want to be like, okay, right, I don't want to say an easy win, but who can we engage quickly and hopefully work with them and discharge them, and
get the next
everybody else, they will have to find a different way, and whether that's through the justice system or through social services, they'll have to find a different route to get that support, because we don't have the capacity or the resources, and that's quite sad.
I feel like it's going a bit heavy now. No, I think it's the reality of things, and I know we've spoken about sort of similar things, and that was over a year ago, and to think over a year later we're still having these conversations, and I think we can only hope that in a year's time we can start to have some different conversations and start to see some change, even if it's a tiny drop in the ocean. I think that will start to bring the hope back again, because it is hard not to lose hope. Does that make sense when it looks like this? But hey, we're still here, we're still in the services, so I think that shows that we've still got some hope.
And there are sparkling exceptions to these things, and I think the more awareness that is raised about it, I think and it's not that people aren't aware of some of this anyway. So
yeah.
And like Mariam's doing is like, no, I'm not going to fit into the scripts and the rules of this. I'm not going to get worn down. I'm going to just be here saying, what are we doing about these social identifiers, and how are we thinking about them in a way that's really supporting the families and the clients that we're working with. That's the stoicism we need.
Yeah.
And I think just before we close, is there any sort of closing remarks from you, Mariam?
I guess it wasn't closing remarks actually.
She's like, let's keep it going.
Open it up.
It's like you're closing. The conversation's coming to a natural finish. But I was quite curious about, because Megan, I know your work context currently is I don't know if you spoke about this before. It's slightly different from a CAMS context, and I was curious about kind of how working systemically within the organisation you work on or within your context, how might that kind of in terms of your contribution to the conversations. So I was quite curious about that. I didn't want it to be all about CAMS, or we could do another episode and make it all about the other CAMS organisations. But no, I was really curious about that.
I can say something really, really quickly about it. In terms of, let me just reorganize my thoughts. I suppose because we're not statutory services and we don't get money from the government, and we're not the organisation I work for is not a political, it's completely apolitical because it's a charity. But by the nature of the work that gets done, there is a lot of social activism at its core, and there's a lot around human rights at its core. And that means the people that are attracted to come and work there have a certain way of looking and viewing and thinking about things already. So I feel incredibly lucky to be working with people who share some real core values and who are already thinking about, okay, and I say that really tentatively because I'm really aware that there are some very, very big, I'm not going to name them, but some very, very big international organisations who do lots of stuff around human rights and social justice causes that are actually, I've known people that have worked for them who found them deeply problematic because there's a lot of racism steeped into the practices just throughout. And that's not been my experience in this small charity.
So that's good.
So I feel really lucky that actually I'm in a
so I wasn't sure if it was good.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, I'm glad that it's not got that. I haven't experienced that, so it feels really lucky. I feel really lucky to have that and have that support.
Actually, following on from that, so if, compared to your experience in the NHS, and I know you're even in both at the moment, like what Mam was talking about, do you feel like you would feel safe enough to raise these things and feel like you'd be heard? Does that make sense? Like you're not worried about hierarchical stuff or being dismissed or being palmed off, and do you know what I mean? You feel like you can actually talk about these things if needed. And
but only so I've worked in a few different parts of the NHS, and over the last few years I've worked always within one hospital, but I've worked in different done different kind of roles, additional roles whilst I've been there as well, always as a therapist, but in a different additional sites. And some of those sites I've really seen how incredibly toxic, and how those rules that we get taught very, very quickly, we realise the rules of an environment, how to stay safe, how to navigate it and to survive a work day. I've realised that, okay, those spaces aren't very safe, and actually even as a new person you can't come in and say, well, that seems just like absolutely deplorable, why are we doing this like this? You were I quickly learned that you can't say those kinds of things, and so I was like, right, this is not for me. I can't work here. But actually in the hospital I've never had that problem, and that's partly because the management my line management and my team has always been amazing. And also again it's because we share values, so
it's not all doom and gloom in the NHS.
No, not at all. Like my line management is like the team that I work with is really diverse in terms of like so many different social
Thinking.
identifiers, but they're thinking as well, their approaches, and they're always developing a mix of ages, and it's like I can bring them any kind of any thinking I have, and we'll actually have a conversation about it, and so it feels really supportive, and that's why I stay there. It's a good team.
And so far, I know it's obviously early days in the other sector, but so far, do you feel like if you needed to, you don't? Yeah, you feel like
But I know not everybody has that, so I feel very, very lucky.
I mean, it shouldn't be that way, but we're glad either way. We're not jealous. We're glad.
But there's a reason why I don't work in camps. Sorry.
Don't come for camp.
I'm sorry,
No comment, no
because
comment.
I know how stretched you guys are.
It's wild.
Services is a little bit got a little bit bigger budget.
I mean, crisis camps is stretched, but we don't have the long waiting lists because we genuinely cannot afford to do that with kids who are suicidal.
Oh yeah.
You know, I was like, this is so good we're having this conversation today, because this has just added fuel to the fire burning in me to like whip certain situations into shape. So that's great. And no,
She's gonna blame us.
Yeah, no. Oh god.
Listen to our episode, okay?
Megan, when I saw you and I had that bottle, you were like, Marion, you cannot carry something like that around.
What were you carrying?
A bottle?
Something else. This bottle, and it looked like.
Oh yeah, I know. It looked like. Yeah,
Like the ones where you put alcohol in.
No.
I don't think Marion would love that.
And then I was like, "What are you doing that kind of a bottle?" I was so confused.
No, she had. We were talking about it because did it look like, or had it painted on the side like either a bottle, a bullet, or a gun or something?
No,
and I was just like,
no,
you can't have that.
It was literally like a bullet bottle. Like the actual lid was.
The
like,
top of the bullet.
It's literally, it's literally like pointing either like a missile or something. I know we added like it's a really sensitive thing to talk about, but also at the same time, it's like there's something you said about shaking up the system and really, like really shaking things up. And I guess at the moment, what's also quite different as well in the service that I work in terms of like shaking things up, there is a lot of new people who share the values of social justice, and for me that's cool. So one of the key things that you were saying, Megan, about people share the values, and that just like that's part of the reason why I'm working at camp service. Like there's something that I want. There's something in terms of our own values about those families and those young people that the reason I chose to work in camps. So I'm not gonna like let the stuff that is happening organizationally deter that value, because that's still very important and that's still very key to me. But also it's because a lot of people say that it comes for similar things. But of course, what's happening is not really reflective of that. And so I think the idea of actually what is the values of the organisation, what is the values of the team, what is the values of people that work in that team, and if it's not all in sync or we're all talking a different language, then something is not quite right, is it? Like how is it aligned? How are we all coexisting? And this is the work we're supposed to be doing, but we're not aligning in terms of doing that in the way that we said we are supposed to do it in. So maybe that's my closing comment. So values and not being like, I'm going to keep talking and I'm going to keep voicing that, because no, people should not be silencing core values that are essential to just being human. Being human.
Yeah, and I think that really fits in nicely with how we opened up with what Fazana was saying in terms of, there should be a shared value thing, and I'm hoping that, ma'am, the next time we bring that up in that organizational context, and the next time we bring that up in the multi-systemic working context, I'm really hoping that people start to stop and reflect. I think that's my big thing, and maybe it's, I don't know, like, I mean, you shouldn't have to babysit or spoon feed people. Maybe it's really like helping. I know, but sadly we might just have to, because if we're the only ones that have the right now the voice or the words to put to it, like, because it's not funny to have to keep saying the same thing. Like I want you to be able to sit there one day and hear somebody else say and be like, okay, maybe I'm not speaking to a brick wall, you know, maybe people are actually stopping to now think and reflect. And even if it means the next meeting, I don't know, in a month's time, we have to revisit it. Like, I know that it might not feel, never not comfortable, but I think Mum just really encouraged to be like, yes, we're not going to be silent. Do you know what I mean? We're going to keep fighting.
I think as much as it can get very exhausting, I don't think it's ever right to say, I'm not going to bother anymore, because then we sort of end up like those people who become extremely desensitized and kind of like, oh, the system's never going to change. I don't want to be those people. I think that if we just think about, or the way I sort of see it is on a micro level, if we are able to instigate some kind of thinking around how we're navigating a care plan for someone, how we're interpreting certain behaviors of the young people or adults that we work with. Is it racialized? How, you know, are there, I think just asking sort of reflexive questions around that in MDTs even, I think, can, even if they don't understand it straight away, I think just prompting that for them to kind of think about. I was also thinking about this idea of sort of partnership working and like trying to develop kind of better relationships. I know that CAMHS and social care don't have the best relationship because they all just kind of scapegoat each other. I mean, which too, even CAMHS and schools, which too. Yeah, they just scapegoat each other. Everyone pushes it's like your job. It's so like partnership working in terms of how do we sort of come together because we all, interestingly, we're all here for the same reason. It's just we have different focus points because of our jobs and our responsibilities. But then why is it when it comes to talking about certain things it becomes a defense thing? So,
do you think if there was, and we can't have this, but like if there was all the resource in the world, do you think that would still be the case, that these would still be? I think there would be a different difficulty we'll probably have, but I don't think it would be this intense. Does that make sense? I think a lot of these people say, oh, I don't have the time, or immediately it's not my job to do that. Does that make sense? And then we can all say that it's not to do certain things. Do you know what I mean? But I think it will make a difference, but I'm sure we'll be having a different conversation. But we can cross that bridge, when we get this sort of thing. But I think they're not mutually exclusive. Does that make sense? I think it definitely contributes to. I'm not optimistic, but I think I'm not giving you all the money, brother. I have no idea. No, but in a hypothetical anything. Dystopian world. If that was the case. Utopian world. Utopian. Yeah, not dystopian. In a utopian world, I still think there needs to be sort of fundamental training in all these types of professions that work around vulnerable Black families, children, to think about those types of things. And I feel like in some trainings it's just not fundamental. And I think but money would do it, because some people won't do that if you don't pay them the right money. Like I know that a lot of people, the DEI people are like people don't want to pay us, but they want us to be doing this DEI stuff. Like so I think if it's channeled in the right places, then if we had all the resources, it's making sure it's been channeled in the right places towards the right thing, like you were saying, like in the fundamental trainings and things like that. What I know we've got to finish, but what I was saying, I was just thinking of that metaphor of it feels like, even though it feels like we may never see the results of it, absolutely. But it feels like I'll have the hope for us. I'll hold it. But what it is it feels like we're planting in this political economy. No, but it feels like my tiny house under the lorries. Are you sure? My tiny house. But it feels like we're planting seeds for trees that we may never see, which is a famous quote. That we may never be able to sit under the shade of, but we're planting the seeds, and it's not always necessary for us to see even the little shoots. Well, hopefully we can, maybe a sprout. But it's good that the roots are taking deep. The roots are there, and that's the change. Yeah. That's what I'm hoping for. Quote Megan 2024. That was not me. That was definitely stolen. Please don't think that's me. Well, you copyrighted. Yeah, I'm not copyrighting anything. But I think so. Mariam, you are sowing seeds. We are all sowing seeds. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely agreeing with that. I didn't want to say something, but then I'm like, no. No, because I was also going to say, I think with all the money in the world, but no, we're sowing seeds. I like that. Let's kind of, let's hold on to that.
Bye, guys.
Are we peacing out? Okay.
See you next time.
Bye.